He built fortunes from neighborhoods. One rainy ride, a tired teacher poured out her heart, and she had no idea the man driving could ruin her world. Before we begin the story, tell us where you are watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to the channel, like this video. John Stark stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, 50 stories above the city that never stopped moving. Below him, traffic crawled like blood through veins, headlights blinking in the growing darkness. He should have felt powerful up here, untouchable. Instead, he felt nothing at all. "Mr. Stark, the board is waiting," his assistant reminded him through the intercom. He straightened his tie, Italian silk, custom-made, worth more than most people earned in a month. Everything about him screamed success. The tailored suit that fit like a second skin. The Patek Philippe watch that cost 6 figures. The corner office with art worth millions hanging on the walls. At 35, John had built an empire from ashes. Stark Enterprises didn't just develop real estate. It transformed entire neighborhoods. Luxury hotels, where abandoned warehouses once stood. Shopping complexes where poverty used to live. He turned decay into profit, and the world called him a genius. But tonight, as he walked into that boardroom, he felt the weight of every decision he'd ever made pressing down on his shoulders. "Gentlemen," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table, "let's talk about Brookside." The presentation lit up the screen. Charts, projections, a rendering of gleaming towers where something else currently stood. Brookside Elementary, his chief financial officer announced, sits on prime real estate. We acquire it. We build the Brookside Resort and Residences. Luxury condos, starting at $2 million. The ROI is astronomical. John studied the numbers. Perfect, clean, profitable. The school closes next month due to budget cuts, another executive added. We've already got the mayor's approval. This is a done deal, John. We just need your signature. He picked up the pen. It was gold, heavy, expensive, just like everything else in his life. "One question," he said. "Where do the kids go?" Silence filled the room. "That's not really our concern," someone finally said. "The district will relocate them. That's how these things work." John nodded slowly. Of course, that's how these things worked. He'd done deals like this 100 times before. Buy low, build high, profit higher. The formula never failed. He signed the documents. But that night, alone in his penthouse with a glass of bourbon he didn't want to drink, John couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a terrible mistake. Laura stood in the rain outside City Hall, her cardboard sign bleeding ink down her hands. Around her, parents and students huddled under umbrellas, their voices rising in chants that the wind kept stealing away. "Save our school! Save our school!" She was soaked through, shivering in her thin jacket. She'd been teaching for 7 years, and every single day she chose to stay at Brookside Elementary instead of taking jobs at wealthier schools that offered twice the pay. Because these kids, her kids, needed someone who believed in them. "Ms. Laura!" A reporter pushed through the crowd, camera crew following. "How do you respond to John Stark's statement that this development will bring jobs to the community?" Laura looked straight into that camera, rain streaming down her face, and spoke from a place so deep inside her that it hurt. "John Stark doesn't know this community. He's never walked these halls where children learn to dream, despite everything telling them not to. He's never seen a kid's face light up when they finally understand a math problem, or watch them perform in a school play their parents worked double shifts to attend. He's buying out the dreams of children for skyscrapers that nobody who lives here can afford." Her voice cracked. "We're not against progress. We're against erasure. These children deserve better than being treated like obstacles in the way of someone's profit margin." The footage went viral within hours. By midnight, Laura's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friend requests, messages, news outlets wanting interviews. But she silenced it all and went back to her tiny apartment, where the heating barely worked and the sink leaked, and she graded papers until her eyes burned. Because tomorrow she still had students who needed her, no matter what some billionaire decided their neighborhood was worth. John watched Laura's speech 17 times. He told himself he was analyzing the opposition, understanding the pushback. That's what smart businessmen did. They studied their critics. But that wasn't why he kept replaying it. There was something in her eyes, a fire he'd forgotten existed. She spoke about those children like they were her own, like their pain was her pain, like their dreams mattered more than anything money could buy. When was the last time he'd cared about anything that deeply? He couldn't remember. "Sir, we've scheduled a press conference to address the backlash." His assistant informed him the next morning. "We'll emphasize job creation, community improvement, the usual talking points." John nodded, but his mind was somewhere else. What do we know about her? The teacher? Laura, 29 years old. Grew up in the Brookside neighborhood. Full scholarship to State University. Graduated top of her class. Could have worked anywhere, chose to come back and teach where she grew up. Lives alone, no significant other we know of. Beloved by students and parents. She's a problem, Mr. Stark. A sympathetic one. A problem. Was that all she was? "Cancel the press conference," John heard himself say. "Sir, I need to think. Give me a few days." He spent those days doing something he hadn't done in years, wandering the city on foot. Not the parts he usually saw from car windows and helicopter views. The real city, where paint peeled and sidewalks cracked and people worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. He walked past Brookside Elementary, stood outside the chain-link fence, watching children play during recess. Their laughter sounded different than he expected. Lighter, purer, free from the weight of knowing their school was already sold. And that's when he saw her. Laura was outside with her class, her smile bright, despite everything. She helped a little girl with pigtails reach the monkey bars, cheered when a boy made a basket, settled an argument between 2 kids with patience John didn't know existed. She looked happy, genuinely, completely happy. When was the last time he'd felt that? The idea came to him suddenly, recklessly. It was insane, inappropriate, probably impossible. But John Stark hadn't built an empire by playing it safe. He wanted to know her, the real her, not the activist facing down his corporation, but the woman who made those children laugh. And there was only one way to do that. She could never know who he really was. The rain came down in sheets the following Thursday evening. Laura stood outside the airport, exhausted from a teaching conference in the next state, watching taxi after taxi drive past without stopping. She'd been standing there for 20 minutes, soaked and shivering, when an older sedan pulled up. Nothing fancy, actually kind of beat up compared to the usual airport cabs. The driver rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" Laura hesitated. The car wasn't marked as an official taxi, but the driver had kind eyes, and she was desperate. How much to Brookside? $20. Half what the other cabs charged. She got in. John had spent the last 3 days preparing for this moment. He'd rented the car through a service that asked no questions, changed into worn jeans and a simple jacket, left the watch at home, wore a baseball cap pulled low. He barely recognized himself in the mirror, and that was exactly the point. "Rough day?" he asked as he pulled into traffic. Laura laughed tiredly. "That obvious? You've got that look, like you're carrying the world on your shoulders." "Just a small part of it. The part that involves 63 children and a school that's about to disappear." She didn't know why she was opening up to a stranger. Maybe because it was easier to be honest with someone who didn't know her story. Someone who wasn't waiting for her to be strong. "Brookside Elementary?" John asked carefully. "You've heard about it?" "I've heard something. The billionaire buying it up?" Laura's hands clenched in her lap. "John Stark, the man who thinks everything has a price tag, including children's futures." John felt each word like a blow, but he kept his voice steady. "You sound like you've got personal experience with men like that." "I've got experience with the damage they leave behind. I grew up in Brookside, in a cramped apartment where my mom worked 2 jobs and still couldn't always keep the heat on. But you know what we had? Community. A school where teachers knew every kid's name, where we were more than statistics or obstacles to someone's profit." She stared out at the rain. "John Stark looks at our neighborhood and sees potential money. I look at it and see potential people. We're speaking completely different languages." John's throat felt tight. Maybe he doesn't understand. Maybe nobody's ever showed him what you see. Then he should look harder. Or better yet, he should stay in his penthouse and let us save our own neighborhood. The rest of the ride passed in silence. When they reached her apartment building, a modest walk-up with peeling paint and a door that stuck, Laura pulled out $20. "Keep it," John said, "but consider it my contribution to the Brookside Fight Fund." She smiled then, really smiled, and something in John's chest cracked open. "Thank you for the ride and the kindness. I'm Laura, by the way." He caught himself just in time. "Call me James." "Well, James, you're too good for a taxi driver." She had no idea how wrong she was. John started showing up at places he knew Laura would be. It wasn't hard to track her schedule. She was refreshingly public about her life. Morning coffee at the same cafe. Grocery shopping on Tuesday evenings. Saturday mornings at the community center where she volunteered. He made it look like coincidence. Their paths crossing naturally. The taxi driver who just happened to be in the right place at the right time. "James!" Laura called out one morning when she saw his cab. "Are you stalking me, or am I just lucky?" "Just lucky," he said with a smile that felt more real than any expression he'd worn in years. She hopped in, holding 2 coffee cups. "Here, you look like you could use it." The coffee was cheap, probably bitter. John drank it like it was the finest espresso money could buy. They started talking. Really talking. Laura told him about her students, little Emma, who wrote poetry, Miguel, who wanted to be a scientist, Jasmine, who sang like an angel. She told him about her mother, who died 2 years ago, who taught her that education was the only inheritance that mattered. "She cleaned offices at night so I could have school supplies," Laura said softly. "Every pencil, every notebook. She sacrificed for that. How can I let these kids lose what she fought so hard to give me?" John found himself sharing too, carefully edited truths that felt more honest than any lie. "I lost my mother young too. She was a teacher, actually." This part was true. Victoria Stark had taught 2nd grade before she married his father, the ruthless businessman who'd taught John that sentiment was weakness. She used to say that teaching was the only job where you could change the world one heart at a time, John continued. "I'd forgotten she said that. Until now." Laura reached across the seat and squeezed his hand. Just for a moment. But John felt it like electricity. "She sounds wonderful," Laura said. "I'm sorry you lost her." "So am I." He dropped her at school and watched her disappear through the doors. Watched her greet every single child by name, her face lighting up, as if each one was the most important person in the world. And John Stark, billionaire, corporate titan, man who'd sworn he'd never let emotions cloud his judgment, felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Part 6. Falling the lies got easier and harder at the same time. Easier because Laura never questioned James the taxi driver. Why would she? He was kind, thoughtful, always there when she needed a ride. He helped her carry groceries, listened to her vent about bureaucratic nonsense at the school district, made her laugh with terrible jokes when she'd had a bad day. Harder because every moment with her felt like betraying something sacred. 3 weeks into his deception, Laura's apartment sink exploded. She called James in a panic. "I know this is weird, but do you know anything about plumbing? My landlord won't answer, and there's water everywhere, and I have lesson plans due tomorrow. I'll be right there." John had never fixed a sink in his life. But YouTube was remarkably educational, and his determination not to let Laura down was stronger than his incompetence. He showed up with tools borrowed from a hardware store where he'd had to ask the clerk which end of a wrench to use. Laura answered the door in sweatpants and an oversized shirt, hair in a messy bun, looking more beautiful than any woman he'd ever seen in designer gowns. "My hero," she said with a relieved smile. The sink was a disaster. So was John's attempt to fix it. But somehow, between online tutorials and sheer stubborn refusal to quit, he got it working. "You're amazing," Laura said, handing him a towel. "Let me make you dinner. It's the least I can do." They sat on her worn couch, eating pasta she'd made from scratch, and John couldn't remember the last time food had tasted this good. Maybe because it wasn't about the food. It was about sitting close enough to feel her warmth. hearing her laugh at his stories, feeling normal for the first time in years. "Can I ask you something?" Laura said after a while. "And you can tell me if I'm overstepping. Anything? You seem, I don't know, like you're running from something. Or hiding. Sometimes I look at you and you seem so sad underneath everything else." John's heart hammered. "What makes you say that? The way you talk about your past, like there's this whole life you left behind and you're not sure if you made the right choice." She had no idea how right she was. "Maybe I am running," he admitted quietly. "Maybe I spent so long being someone I thought I was supposed to be that I forgot who I actually wanted to be." Laura set down her plate and turned to face him fully. "And who's that? I'm still figuring it out. But this," he gestured between them, "being here with you, it feels real in a way nothing has felt real in a very long time." She studied his face, and John wondered what she saw. Did she see through his disguise? Did she sense the lies? "I feel it too," she whispered. And then they were kissing, soft at first, tentative, like they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. Then deeper, with all the longing John had been carrying since the first time he saw her on that protest line. When they finally pulled apart, Laura's eyes were bright. "I don't usually do this, fall for mysterious taxi drivers. I don't usually," John started, then stopped. Because what could he say? "I don't usually pretend to be someone I'm not to get close to a woman. I don't usually sabotage my own business deals because I'm falling in love. You don't usually what?" "Let myself feel this much," he finished. At least that was true. She kissed him again, and for those perfect moments, John forgot about the lies. Forgot about Stark Enterprises and Brookside Elementary and the impossible situation he'd created. He was just James, and she was just Laura, and that was enough. John started spending less time at his office and more time in Brookside. He told his board he was working from home on special projects. What he was really doing was falling deeper into a life that wasn't his. Laura convinced him to volunteer at the school. "We're running a community service program," she explained. "Local people teaching kids about different careers. You could talk about, what do you know about? Business, hostile takeovers, crushing competitors, making millions. Driving?" he suggested weakly. She laughed. "Perfect. We'll call it Life Skills Week. You can teach them about navigation, road safety, customer service." So John Stark, CEO, found himself sitting in a circle with third graders, helping them build model cars, and talking about what it meant to help people get where they needed to go. Little Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. James, do you love your job?" John looked at Laura across the classroom, reading with another group of kids, her face glowing with patience and joy. "You know what?" he said. "Lately, I really do." But reality was closing in. His board was getting restless. The Brookside deal was stalled because John kept finding reasons to delay: environmental surveys, permit issues, community feedback periods that weren't legally required, but that he insisted on anyway. "What's going on with you?" his CFO demanded during a tense video call. "This project should have broken ground already. Investors are asking questions." "Let them ask," John said. "We're doing our due diligence. We're losing money every day we wait. This isn't like you." No, it wasn't like him. The old him would have bulldozed through any obstacle. But the man he was becoming, the man Laura made him want to be, couldn't do it. He started digging deeper into the Brookside deal, late nights in his penthouse, going through every document, every contract. And that's when he found it. The signatures were forged, not his. Those were real. But the school district's approval, the community board's agreement, even the environmental clearance, all falsified by members of his own team, eager to push the deal through. John stared at the evidence on his screen, a cold fury building in his chest. They'd made him complicit in fraud, used his name and reputation to steal from a community that had already lost so much. He knew what he had to do, but telling the truth meant exposing himself to Laura, and losing her would hurt worse than any business failure ever could. The announcement came down like a hammer. Brookside Elementary, final sale approved. Demolition begins in 48 hours. Laura saw the headline on her phone during her lunch break and felt her world tilt. 48 hours. 2 days. Less than the time it took to plan a proper lesson on photosynthesis. And they were taking away everything. She didn't cry, didn't break down. She got angry instead. By evening, she'd organized a protest. Parents, students, teachers, anyone who'd ever walked those halls or believed in what they represented. They gathered at the school with signs and determination, and when Laura suggested they chain themselves to the gates, half a dozen people volunteered immediately. "We're not moving," she told the news cameras, "not until someone with a conscience looks us in the eye and explains why money matters more than children." John watched the broadcast from his penthouse, watched Laura chain herself to those gates with a strength that made his chest ache, watched security guards trying to pull her away while children cried and parents shouted. He'd caused this. His company, his name, his greed. The documents proving fraud sat on his desk. If he released them, he'd expose his own company, tank his stock, face lawsuits. Possibly criminal charges for his executives. But Laura would lose everything anyway unless someone stopped this. John made his choice. He called his lawyer. "I'm going to blow the whistle on my own company. Prepare for the fallout." "John, you can't be serious. This will destroy Stark Enterprises." "Then let it burn." He changed into his James disguise one last time, grabbed the evidence files, and drove to Brookside Elementary, where the woman he loved was fighting a battle she didn't know she'd already won. The crowd had swelled to hundreds by the time John arrived. News helicopters circled overhead. Police formed barriers. It was chaos and noise and desperation. John pushed through, his USB drive full of evidence clutched in his hand. "Laura!" She looked up from where she was chained, her face streaked with tears and rain and defiance. "James, what are you doing here?" "I have proof," he said, loud enough for the cameras to hear. "Proof that this sale is based on fraud, that the documents were forged, that Stark Enterprises broke the law." The crowd went silent. Every phone, every camera pointed at him. "How do you know this?" Laura asked. John's heart pounded. This was it, the moment of truth, because I've been investigating it, and I can prove everything. He handed the USB drive to a reporter. "Check it. You'll find forged signatures, falsified approvals, evidence of corruption at every level. This deal is illegal, and it needs to stop." Security tried to grab him, but the crowd surged forward, protecting the taxi driver who was fighting for their school. The police had to hold back, faces uncertain, as the evidence started spreading online. Laura was staring at John like she was seeing him for the first time. "Who are you really?" But before he could answer, someone shouted, "That's John Stark!" A phone with his CEO photo appeared, then another. The crowd compared the images to the man in front of them. Remove the cap, imagine the suit, see past the disguise. "Oh my God," Laura whispered. "It is him." The chains fell away. Laura stood, backing away from John like he'd struck her. "You're him. You're John Stark. This whole time." "Laura, please." Everything was a lie. Her voice broke. "The taxi. The coffee. The conversations. You pretended to be someone else just to... What? Get close to me? Study the enemy? No! I was trying to understand, to see what I'd been blind to. By lying to me." She was crying now. Angry tears that cut deeper than any accusation. "I told you everything. About my mother, my students, my dreams. I let you into my life, into my heart, and you were lying every single second." "I fell in love with you," John said desperately. "That's the only truth that matters. Everything else, the disguise, the deception, I did it because I wanted to know the real you. And I wanted you to know the real me, not the man you hated." "I don't even know who the real you is," Laura shouted. "Was any of it genuine? The sink? The school? Did you even mean any of it?" "All of it. Every moment. Laura, I'm trying to make this right. I'm exposing my own company, destroying everything I built, because you showed me that none of it matters if I'm not doing good in the world." She shook her head. backing away further. You should have told me. You should have trusted me with the truth instead of playing games with my life. I was afraid I'd lose you. And now you have. Laura turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. John tried to follow, but reporters swarmed him, questions flying like bullets. Security pulled him toward a police car. The evidence was already spreading, viral within minutes, just like Laura's original speech. But this time, John wasn't watching from his penthouse. He was in the center of the storm he'd created, and the one person he wanted to reach was gone. The next 48 hours were a blur. Stark Enterprises' stock crashed. The board called emergency meetings. Executives were arrested. Lawsuits piled up like snow. And John stood in the center of it all, watching everything he'd built for 15 years collapse. He didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the silence from Laura. She wouldn't answer his calls, wouldn't respond to messages. When he tried to go to her apartment, her neighbor told him she didn't want to see him. John released a public statement. I'm resigning as CEO of Stark Enterprises, effective immediately. I'm transferring ownership of the Brookside property to the school district, with no conditions. Additionally, I'm establishing the Stark Education Trust with a $50 million endowment to support underfunded schools across the city. The press called it damage control, a PR stunt. But John didn't care about his reputation anymore. He just wanted Laura to know he was serious. His lawyer found him in his penthouse office, packing up personal items. You could fight this, claim you were trying to expose the fraud from the inside. Public sympathy might swing your way. I don't want sympathy. I want accountability. John, they're going to crucify you. Good, maybe I deserve it. He signed away his company, sold most of his assets, kept enough to live on, a fraction of what he'd had, and put everything else into the trust. Laura would be the director if she agreed. He'd set it up so she'd have complete control. He wouldn't be involved, wouldn't have any say. It was the only gift he could give her, the only apology that might mean something. But it still wasn't enough. 3 weeks after the protest, John wrote Laura a letter. Not an email, not a text. An actual letter, handwritten, because some things deserved the permanence of ink on paper. Dear Laura, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this whole thing. But I need to say it anyway, even if you throw this away the moment you see my name. You were right about everything. I was a coward who hid behind a disguise instead of facing you honestly. I told myself I was trying to understand, but really, I was afraid. Afraid you'd see me as the villain. Afraid you'd never give me a chance to be anything else. But you deserved better than my fear. You deserved the truth from the beginning. My mother was a teacher at Brookside Elementary, did you know that? 30 years ago, before she married my father. She taught second grade in the same building you're fighting to save. She used to tell me about her students, their potential, their brightness, their dreams. She believed in them the way you believe in your kids now. When she got sick, she tried to keep teaching. But my father, he was like I became, cold, profit-focused. He told her teaching was a waste of her talents, that she could make more money doing anything else. She eventually quit to focus on being the perfect society wife. She died believing she'd failed those students by leaving. And I dealt with that grief by becoming exactly like my father. Building walls, measuring worth in dollars. Convincing myself that's what success looked like, until I met you. You reminded me of everything she believed in. Everything I'd forgotten mattered. And instead of being brave enough to tell you that, I put on a disguise and pretended to be someone simpler, someone better. But here's the thing I learned. James the taxi driver wasn't a different person. He was just the parts of me I'd buried, the parts that knew how to care, how to help, how to be human. You didn't fall in love with a lie. You fell in love with the truth I'd been hiding from myself. I know that doesn't make the deception okay. I know I hurt you. And I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I'd been brave enough to show you the real me from the start. The trust is yours, no strings attached. You'll never have to see me or deal with me. I've set it up so you have complete control. Use it to save every school like Brookside. Use it to prove that children matter more than skyscrapers. Use it to honor your mother and mine. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you thought I was. but thank you for showing me who I could become. Love always. John, he delivered the letter himself, left it in her mailbox, and walked away. Didn't wait for a response. Didn't expect one. Some bridges, once burned, stayed burned. John moved out of his penthouse. It felt too empty, too high above the world, too much like everything he was trying to leave behind. He found a modest apartment in a different neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just enough space for him and the life he was trying to rebuild. He started driving again, not as a disguise this time, but for real. Signed up with a rideshare company, worked regular shifts, met people going to airports and hospitals and first dates, listened to their stories, helped them get where they needed to go. It felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. Months passed. Brookside Elementary stayed open, thriving now with funding from the trust. John followed the news from a distance, saw photos of Laura at ribbon-cutting ceremonies for renovated schools, read articles about the education programs she was launching. She looked happy. That was enough. He dated occasionally. Nice women who didn't deserve someone still in love with someone else. It never went anywhere. How could it? Laura had changed something fundamental in him, shown him what connection could feel like. Everything else felt like going through motions. His therapist, because yes, he was in therapy now, asked him if he regretted his choices. Which ones? John asked. The lies? Yes. But meeting her? Trying to change? Never. Have you considered that forgiveness might not look the way you expect? What do you mean? You're waiting for Laura to forgive you. But maybe the real work is forgiving yourself, accepting that you made mistakes, did better, and learning to live with both. John thought about that a lot. About the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. About whether redemption was even possible, or if he was just trading one form of emptiness for another. But then, one Saturday morning, 6 months after everything fell apart, his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Silence. Then, it's Laura. John's heart stopped, started again, raced. Hi. Her voice wavered. I got your letter. I know it's been months, but I needed time. I understand. Do you want to get coffee? Just coffee. I'm not promising anything else. John closed his eyes. I'd really like that. They met at the same cafe where John used to buy Laura terrible coffee. He arrived early, nerves jangling like wind chimes in a storm. Ordered 2 cups, both plain, both simple. Sat at a corner table where the world couldn't intrude. When Laura walked in, John forgot how to breathe. She looked different. Not in any way he could define exactly. Maybe it was the confidence in her stride, the peace in her eyes. Or maybe it was just that 6 months of distance made him see her fresh, like art you appreciate more the second time. Hi, she said softly. Hi. They sat in awkward silence, so much to say, no idea where to start. Finally, Laura spoke. I almost threw your letter away. Held it over the trash can for a full minute. Why didn't you? Because my mother always told me everyone deserves to explain themselves, even people who hurt us. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. And because part of me needed to hear it. John waited. Letting her lead this, it was the least he could do. I was so angry at you, Laura continued. For months, I was furious. Every time I thought about those drives, those conversations, the way you helped with the sink, all of it felt tainted. Like you'd stolen something precious and twisted it into a lie. I know. But then I started working with the trust, seeing what you set up. You gave me complete control, John. No board oversight, no strings. Just belief that I'd do the right thing with it. She met his eyes. That's not something a manipulative person does. That's not a PR stunt. That's genuine trust from someone who wants to make amends. John's throat tightened. I just wanted to give you the tools to save every school like Brookside. To prove that children's dreams matter more than any building I could have constructed. We've saved 12 schools so far, Laura said, with plans for 20 more. We're creating after-school programs, updating technology, hiring counselors. We're changing lives, John, because of what you did, because of what you're doing with it. No, she shook her head. Because of what we did together. Even with all the lies, you showed me your heart. The part of you that wanted to help, but didn't know how. And I showed you why it mattered. We changed each other. John wanted to reach across the table, hold her hand, pull her close. But he kept his distance. I'm so sorry I hurt you. If I could go back. You can't. Neither of us can. We can only decide who we are moving forward. Laura took a shaky breath. I'm not ready to forgive you completely. That's going to take more time. But I'm ready to try. To see if there's something real underneath all the damage. What does that mean? It means coffee. Just coffee. Maybe dinner sometime if this goes well. Getting to know each other, really know each other, without disguises or deception. She smiled tentatively. Think you can handle that? Just being John? No taxi driver costume to hide behind? For the first time in months, John felt hope flicker in his chest. I can try, but fair warning. John without the disguise is kind of awkward. Doesn't know many jokes. Tends to overthink everything. I think I can handle that. They talked for 2 hours. About the schools. About John's new life driving ride shares. About Laura's plans to expand the trust nationally. Real conversation between two people learning to trust each other again. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses and moments of tension when old wounds surfaced, but it was honest. And maybe honest was better than perfect. When they stood to leave, Laura did something that surprised them both. She hugged him. Just briefly. Just enough to say I'm trying. Same time next week? She asked. I'll be here. The coffee meetings became a weekly ritual. Then, twice weekly. Then, dinner. Then walks through the city where John had once only seen investment opportunities but now saw communities. Laura took him to Brookside Elementary's reopening ceremony. The building gleamed with fresh paint, new windows, updated classrooms. Children ran through hallways that hummed with possibility instead of decay. This is what you made possible, Laura said, watching the celebration. John shook his head. This is what you made possible. I just wrote a check. No, you risked everything. Your company, your reputation, your entire identity. That's not just writing a check. That's choosing to be better. Inside the school, John saw photographs lining the hallway. The history of Brookside. Teachers through the decades. And there, in a frame from 30 years ago, was his mother. Young, vibrant, surrounded by students. Victoria Stark, Laura read. She taught here? 2nd grade, for 3 years, before my father convinced her to quit. John stared at his mother's bright smile. She told me once that teaching was like planting gardens in children's minds. You never knew exactly what would bloom, but you knew it would be beautiful. Laura slipped her hand into his. The first time she'd done that since learning the truth. She'd be proud of you for coming back to this, for honoring what she believed in. I hope so. They stood there together, hands intertwined, and John felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not completely, but acceptance. Laura was choosing to see him as more than his mistakes, and maybe that was the beginning of something real. But healing wasn't linear. Some days Laura would text him constantly, sending photos of students or asking his opinion on trust decisions. Other days she'd go silent, needing space to process her complicated feelings. I want to move forward, she told him one evening over dinner. But sometimes I look at you and remember how betrayed I felt, how stupid I felt for not seeing through the disguise. You weren't stupid. I was calculating. I knew exactly what I was doing. That doesn't make me feel better, John. I know. He set down his fork. Laura, if this is too hard, if being around me causes more pain than healing, I'll understand. I'll step back. The trust will keep running. You'll never have to see me. And stop. She reached across the table. I don't want you to disappear. I'm just being honest about where I am. Some days I'm ready to trust you again. Other days I'm terrified you're still hiding something. I'm not. I swear. I'm an open book now. Ask me anything. Okay. Laura's eyes were serious. Why me? Of all the people criticizing your company, why did you need to get close to me specifically? John had known this question was coming, had rehearsed answers that sounded good, but Laura deserved the raw truth. Because you made me feel something. That speech you gave, in the rain, defending those children, it woke up parts of me I'd buried with my mother. You were so passionate, so genuine, so completely opposite to everything my life had become. He met her gaze. And yes, at first I told myself I was just trying to understand the opposition, but honestly, I was drawn to you, to your fire, to the way you cared about things I'd forgotten how to care about. So it was attraction. It was more than that. It was recognition, like seeing someone I used to be, or wanted to be, reflected back at me. John's voice dropped. You made me remember that there's more to life than profit margins and power. You made me want to be worthy of knowing you. Laura was quiet for a long moment. I fell in love with James, the taxi driver who fixed my sink and played with my students and listened like my words mattered. Can you be him without the costume? I don't know, John admitted. James was the parts of me I'd suppressed. But he was still me. I'm trying to integrate it all. The businessman who knows how to create change, and the man who knows why it matters. It's messy. I'm messy. But I'm trying. That's all I can ask. 2 months into their careful reconciliation, reality tested them. A major news outlet wanted to do an expose on John's transformation, from ruthless CEO to education advocate. The journalist promised it would be balanced, fair, but they wanted Laura's perspective. They want to interview me about you, Laura told John over the phone. About us. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. But John, if I do this, if I speak publicly about what happened, I have to be honest. I can't sugarcoat it. I can't pretend it was all some romantic misunderstanding. I wouldn't want you to. It might damage the trust. Donors might pull back if they think the foundation story is messy. John didn't hesitate. Tell the truth. Every bit of it. The trust's credibility matters more than my reputation. And besides, he laughed humorlessly, my reputation is already destroyed. At least this way, it'll be destroyed honestly. Laura did the interview. John watched it alone in his apartment, heart in his throat. The journalist was thorough, asked hard questions. Laura answered them all. He lied to me, Laura said on camera. Extensively, created an entire false identity to get close to me, and when I found out, I felt violated and betrayed. John winced but kept watching. But, Laura continued, he also exposed his own company's fraud, lost everything he'd built, and created something that's now changing thousands of children's lives. People aren't simple. We're all capable of terrible things and beautiful things, sometimes simultaneously. So you've forgiven him? Laura paused. I'm learning to hold multiple truths at once. He hurt me deeply. He also showed me genuine growth. Both things are real. And I'm choosing to believe people can change if they do the work. Are you in a relationship? We're figuring that out. Slowly. With a lot of honest conversation and boundaries. Laura looked directly into the camera. But whatever happens between us personally, the trust will continue. Because this was never about John and me. It's about children who deserve every opportunity to dream. When the interview ended, John's phone rang immediately. You watched? Laura asked. Every second. Are you angry? I didn't pull any punches. Laura, you were perfect. You told the truth. That's all I've ever wanted. His voice cracked slightly. Thank you for believing I can change. Show me I'm right, she said softly. Keep showing me. Every single day. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, 3 months later. John was driving a rideshare shift, something he still did regularly, when he picked up an older woman heading to the airport. She looked familiar, but he couldn't place her. Brookside Elementary, right? She said, studying his face. You're John Stark. I recognize you from the news. John tensed, waiting for accusations. Yes, ma'am. I taught there. With your mother? Victoria. The woman smiled. I'm Patricia Collins. We were friends. John's hands tightened on the wheel. You knew my mother? For 3 years, until she left. She talked about you constantly. Her brilliant little boy who was going to change the world. Patricia's eyes softened. She showed me pictures. You had her smile. She never talked much about her teaching. My father didn't like it. Your father was a fool, Patricia said it matter-of-factly. Victoria was magic in the classroom, but she gave it up because he made her feel like it wasn't enough. She regretted that until the day she died, I'd bet. John pulled over, unable to drive through the emotion choking him. I became him. I became exactly like my father. Built the same kind of empire, made the same kind of choices. But you stopped, Patricia said gently. That's the difference. You recognized what you were becoming, and you chose differently. That took courage your father never had. It took losing everything. Sometimes that's what courage costs. She patted his shoulder. Your mother would be proud. Not of the empire, but of what you did with its ashes. After John dropped her off, he sat in the parking lot and cried. Really cried, for the first time since his mother's funeral. Cried for the years wasted chasing his father's approval. Cried for the man he'd been. Cried for the mother who died believing she'd failed. But also cried in relief. Because Patricia was right. He'd chosen differently. And maybe that meant his mother's legacy. The teacher who believed in planting gardens in children's minds was living on through him after all. He called Laura. Can I see you? Now? What's wrong? Nothing, everything. I need to see you. She gave him her address. When he arrived, she took one look at his face and pulled him inside without questions. John told her everything. About Patricia. About his mother's regrets. About the weight he'd been carrying of becoming his father and betraying everything his mother believed in. But I'm not him, John said. The words feeling true for the first time. I made terrible choices, but I'm choosing better now. And that has to count for something. Laura held him while he shook. It counts for everything. I love you, John said into her shoulder. I know I've said it before, but this time I'm saying it as myself. No disguises, no deception. Just John, who drives ride shares and funds education trusts and is trying every day to be worthy of a woman who makes him want to be better. Laura pulled back to look at him. Tears streamed down her face too. I love you too, she whispered. I've loved you through the anger and the hurt and the confusion, and I'm choosing to love you through the healing too. They kissed, and it felt different from every kiss before. Not the desperate passion of early attraction or the guilty pleasure of stolen moments. This was the kiss of two people who'd seen each other's worst and were choosing each other anyway. They took things slow after that night, but it was a different kind of slow. Not cautious distance, but intentional building. John met Laura's friends, the other teachers from Brookside who'd known her for years. They were skeptical at first, protective of Laura, but John didn't try to charm them. He just listened, asked questions about their students, offered to help where needed. He's different than I expected, one teacher admitted to Laura. Less polished, more real. That's because he's not performing anymore, Laura said. He's just being himself. Laura met John's world too, what was left of it. His former assistant who'd stayed loyal through everything. His therapist who praised the work John was doing. Even his lawyer, who'd become something like a friend. She's good for you, the lawyer observed. You smile now. I didn't realize you never used to smile. They fell into rhythms. Saturday mornings at Brookside where John helped with maintenance projects. Wednesday dinners where they planned trust expansions. Stolen weeknights where they just existed together. Cooking, watching movies, being ordinary. John taught Laura about business strategy, showing her how to leverage the trust's resources for maximum impact. Laura taught John about education, about childhood development, about why certain programs worked while others failed. They became partners, real partners, building something neither could have built alone. 6 months after their reconciliation, the trust held its first annual gala, a fundraiser to expand their reach nationally. Laura had initially resisted. I'm not a gala person, she protested, but recognized the necessity. We need donors, John explained. People with resources who can multiply our impact. And like it or not, they respond to events like this. Fine, but nothing too fancy. No 7-course meals or ice sculptures or whatever rich people do. John laughed. Deal! The event was elegant but grounded, held in a restored community center, not a luxury hotel. Student artwork on the walls. Teachers as speakers instead of celebrities. A program focused on impact, not pageantry. Laura gave the opening speech, and John watched from backstage, marveling at her confidence. She'd grown so much over the past year. Become a leader not just of her classroom but of a movement. We started with one school, Laura told the assembled guests. Brookside Elementary, a building that was going to be demolished for profit. But something remarkable happened. Someone chose to change, chose to see children as more important than buildings, chose redemption over reputation. She gestured to where John stood. John Stark made terrible mistakes. He'll be the first to tell you that. But he also made an incredible choice, to use his resources not for personal gain, but for collective good. And that choice has now saved 17 schools, educated thousands of children, and created a model for education funding that's spreading nationwide. John joined her on stage, hand in hand. People ask me how I can work with him, Laura continued. How I can trust someone who lied to me so completely, and I tell them the same thing every time. Because I believe in second chances. Because I've seen genuine change. Because love isn't about finding perfect people. It's about choosing imperfect people and building something beautiful together. She turned to John. This man broke my heart. And then he spent every day since proving he could be trusted with the pieces. That's not weakness. That's the hardest kind of strength. The room erupted in applause, but John only heard his own heartbeat, only saw Laura's face, only felt the weight of her trust settling around him like armor. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Probably not, she whispered back with a small smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. A year after the gala, John took Laura back to where it all began, not the airport where he'd first picked her up, not Brookside Elementary, but the protest site, the chain-link fence where she'd chained herself, where his world had split open. Why are we here? Laura asked, confused. Because this is where I first saw who you really were, John said. This is where you fought for something bigger than yourself. Where you made me realize I'd been fighting for all the wrong things. The lot was different now, no luxury resort. Instead, a community garden bloomed. The trust had purchased the adjacent property and created a green space for Brookside students. Laura's idea, John's funding, their combined vision. I've been thinking about gardens a lot lately, John continued, about what my mother said, that teaching is like planting gardens in children's minds. But it's not just teaching, it's love too. It's choosing someone and tending to them, helping them grow, being patient with the seasons. He pulled out a small box, not expensive, not by his old standards, but meaningful. A simple ring with a small stone. Laura, you planted a garden in my wasteland heart. You had every reason to walk away, but you stayed. You chose to believe I could be better, and that belief changed my entire life. His voice shook. I know I don't deserve you. I know I'll spend my whole life trying to be worthy, but will you let me try? Will you marry me? Laura's hands covered her mouth. Tears spilled over. You really want this? Forever with me? Forever with you sounds like the only future worth having. She laughed and cried simultaneously. Yes, yes, of course yes. You frustrating, complicated, beautiful man. Yes. John slipped the ring on her finger, and they kissed in the garden they'd built together from the ashes of their broken beginning. The wedding was small, just close friends and family in the Brookside Elementary Gymnasium, because of course it was. Students served as flower girls and ring bearers. Teachers officiated. The whole community celebrated. John's vows made Laura cry. You taught me that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched. That power isn't about control, but about service. That love requires honesty, even when honesty is terrifying. I promise to spend every day earning your trust, to never hide behind disguises or lies, to be brave enough to show you all of me, the good, the bad, and the still learning. Laura's vows made John cry. You taught me that people are never just one thing, that mistakes don't define us. Our choices after the mistakes do. That second chances aren't about forgetting the past, but about building a better future from its lessons. I promise to keep believing in your growth. To challenge you when you need it. To love you through the complicated parts, because that's where real love lives. They danced their first dance in the same gymnasium where John had once helped third graders build model cars. Where he'd first realized that teaching children about navigation was teaching them about life. Patricia Collins, his mother's old friend, caught the bouquet despite being 70. Victoria would have loved this, she told John, the full circle of it. Her son, here in her school, marrying a teacher who's carrying on her legacy. I wish she could have met Laura. Sweetheart, I think she did. Just through you. The trust continued growing. 28 schools saved. 50,000 students impacted. A model that other cities were replicating. John and Laura ran it together. His business acumen, her educational expertise, their shared passion for giving children opportunities. John still drove ride shares sometimes. Keeps me grounded, he explained. Reminds me, I'm just a guy helping people get where they need to go. Laura still taught, though, part-time now. I can't leave my kids completely, she said. They're why I started fighting in the first place. They bought a modest house in Brookside. Not a mansion, not a penthouse, just a home. With a garden in the back where they planted vegetables and flowers and dreams. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on their porch and watch the neighborhood kids play. The community they'd helped save. The future they'd fought for. Do you ever regret it? Laura asked one night. Everything you gave up. John looked at her, his wife, his partner, his redemption, and smiled. I didn't give anything up. I gained everything that matters. That's very poetic for a former ruthless businessman. I learned from the best teacher I know. Laura leaned against him, and they watched the sun set over Brookside, over the school that had almost been destroyed, over the community that had survived, over the garden they'd built together from the ashes of his old life. And John Stark, who'd once measured his worth in millions, now measured it in moments like these. Quiet, simple, real. The man who'd had everything finally understood what it meant to have enough.